Hey everyone, happy Thursday or Friday, I guess, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Diego. I am with the support team at Designlab. And with me, as you know, is Kieran. For our Figma webinar series, he is one of our mentors and also has been leading these really awesome webinar series for Figma. So thank you so much, Kieran. For those of you who have joined us before, as you know, we're gonna let Kieran do the talking, and then we will leave time at the end for all of your questions and answers. And trust me, we do get to everyone's questions and answers. And Lisa was asking a very important question. Will this be recorded? Yes, it will. And it will be live on our YouTube channel. If not tomorrow, most likely by Monday, but every webinar, I'm sorry, that Kieran has hosted is on our YouTube page, and I'll put that the link to the YouTube page in the chat, and I will let Kieran take it away.
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm glad to see some familiar faces in the chat. But yeah, as Diego said, I'm going to be taking some questions at the end of this, so feel free to add those questions in there. To start off, you'll notice that there are some links in the chat there as well. For the people that don't have access to the chat, so in the recording later on, these are just links to the Figma community page link. So it's like Figma's, like the company Figma, they have their own like community page that has a whole bunch of like extra stuff in there. And inside of that, there is an auto layout playground. So I definitely suggest downloading that and playing around in there. The other two links are to Figma's own YouTube series about auto layout. One is a 5-minute one by Rogi, and the other one is for the office hours. So that includes Rogi plus a few of the other people on the actual product design team. So they go really, really in depth into what auto layout is, but it's not for the faint-hearted. It is like, I think, an hour or so. So yeah, dive on in there if you're wanting to get even more information from that. But today, as Diego sort of said, I'm going to be going through auto layout and what the new changes are in auto layout by Figma, because auto layout is an absolutely game-changing feature that things like Sketch and Adobe XD don't really have as good of an equivalent to at the right kind of level. There are like similarities in Adobe XD and Sketch in that kind of way. But I find that the way that they've implemented auto layout in Figma is just stand out, and it's great. So without further ado, let's dive in and yeah, go through some of like the changes that have happened throughout auto layout in Figma. So first, as always, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and do that, and my entire screen. Perfect. All right, there we go. So hopefully everybody can see my screen now. And what I have in here is a few of the changes that have happened over the last couple of like weeks and months. But I'm going to go through one of the major ones, which is in auto layout. Well, first of all, we probably should talk about like what auto layout is, if some of you out there don't know what auto layout is. Well, what it does is, as the name suggests, is that it applies a layout to a couple of elements automatically. So, for example, a really, really basic example would be this button here. So previously, what you would do is you would type in like some sort of text, let's say button, and then we would create a rectangle around that and send it to the back. And what you can then sort of do there is then apply an auto layout to that. And what you'll notice is that it slightly changed and moved around a little bit. But what sort of happens here, obviously you'd style it a little bit nicer than what I have currently. But what actually happens is as I type, the layout of the rectangle there actually expands to fit the text. So this is where that name comes from, auto layout. And it's really, really useful for not only really simple things like this, like a button, but also all the way up to really, really complex things, which I'll get into a little bit later. But one of the main changes that happened recently is that previously you were only able to change the padding for the top and bottom tied together, and the left and right tied together. But now you can actually do individual padding. So previously, if you went into like a very similar window, but it was a little bit different. What you can only do was that you would have to set this to 20, and then this would automatically change to 20 as well. But now we can actually change it individually and then set it to whatever we want there. So as we type in now, now that we've got 20 and 32 all the way around, now we have a much bigger padding for our buttons, and we can put whatever we want in there. So that's the main thing, is this individual padding now. So I can now, if I wanted to create something like this, where we have an icon, visually, I actually want to have something that is less on one side and more on the other side. So in this case, even though it looks like these two sides are pretty much even, there's actually a 4-pixel difference mathematically. So if we zoom in on this, what we can actually see is if we go over to our auto layout settings, we can then see that it is 12, 12, 12, but then we have 16 on the right-hand side. The reason why we have 16 is to, again, balance it. If we set it to 12 there, what you'll notice is that it kind of looks a little bit cramped on the right-hand side. And that's because this has a bounding box and it already has like 2 pixels built into it. So all that is to say is that you can use this to more visually balance your design and do other little bits and pieces like that. So I'm just going to undo that and reset it back to 16. So what you'll notice as well is in this one, we have a direction like set to it. So in this case, we have a vertical direction, but we also have a horizontal direction. So if we click into this one, we can see that we have a horizontal direction applied to this. The reason why this is a set to vertical is just because it's the default. But what actually happens here is that there's only one child within the frame. So what actually happens is that there is nothing to vertically stack, and it doesn't really matter if you chose vertical or horizontal. It's just looking at one item, so it doesn't really matter which way you do it. But in this case, if we were to switch between horizontal and vertical, as you can sort of see, there's some like drastic changes that start to happen. And of course, we want to do horizontal. So what that does is that actually stacks the items within the frame and gives it those properties of horizontal direction. You'll also notice that there is a spacing between the items. So if we zoom in on this here, we can see that there is 8 pixels in between. And that is actually like controlled by this variable here. So if we move that in and out, you can sort of see how that changes based on that. And you can also see how the layout still gets applied even though we've adjusted that spacing. So really keeps your design nice and easy to implement. All right, and then we have this mixed. This will always like show mixed if you have different individual padding. But if you did set it to like 4, for example, it will collapse down into 4 pixels all the way around. As soon as you change it from 4 to, let's say, 5, just a really, really simple one, you can see that it's changed to mixed there, right? So that's one of the things that we can play around with and make sure that we're setting all of our auto layouts appropriately. So yeah, so that's all our padding and individual padding for that. And as you can sort of see, you can apply that to all different types of things in your design. As I've sort of mentioned, I've got all these different buttons here that I can then use as components. And then I've also put them into a component set to then have all these different variants of the same button. And using auto layout just makes it so much easier to do just that. So that's part 1 of auto layout. And as you can sort of see, there's a lot to go through in auto layout and how powerful it really is. So the first part is padding. The second part is the resizing of everything. So if we go into this, this is, as I mentioned at the top of this episode, there is a Figma Playground file in Figma's community page, but they sort of like go through that and talk through what is possible, a few examples, and so on and so forth. So definitely suggest that you check that out, and you can go to that through figma.com/@Figma. And yeah, so this Figma's auto layout playground, what we'll play around with here is the resizing of elements. So what we can sort of like see here is that we have a container, which then has an auto layout applied to it. So we can see that it is a horizontal direction, and you can sort of see that there's a whole bunch of different rectangles with some text in it. The only reason why they've been made into auto layouts as well is so that the text stays centered inside of that. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. You could actually set that up in different ways. It's up to you. But this container is setting up a horizontal with 32 pixels on in between. So if we zoom in on that, we've got 32 pixels in between each of these. And then we also have a, if we select on the overall container again, we also have a 32 pixel gap all the way around. So the really cool thing about this is that this actually does a whole bunch of like cool new things that weren't available in the previous version of Figma. So as we stretch this in and out, we can see different properties are being applied to this. So as we can sort of see here, we've got one here that's set to hug contents. We can set both of those to hug contents. And what that does is that literally, as the name suggests, hugs the contents of the item. So as we expand on that, you can see that everything else gets pushed over based on that. So then we can have a look at this fixed width and then fill vertically. What this does is over on your resizing panel, we have a fixed width. So meaning that we have set the width to an arbitrary number. So let's just say like 300 pixels. And then what we've said for the other axis is that we want this to fill the available space in the container. Right, so we fill the available space that is its parent, which is the container there. So what that does is that allows us to have something that is controlled by its parent, which makes it really, really cool to play around with. In this case, we've fixed the height, but then we've said fill the container. So what we've done here is we've based this off of the contents. So base the width of the contents, base this off of a physical width, so 300 pixels in this case. And then we've said fill horizontally and then fill horizontally. So what will actually happen is the available space is this available space here. And because these last two items are both set to fill horizontally, they'll actually divide the content evenly. Right, so you'll notice that this is actually the same width as this. So 323.5, 323.5. Even when I stretch this out a little bit further, if I grab the right thing, you can sort of see how these two stay stable, whereas these, the right-hand two, are actually filling the available space there. So what I sort of suggest here is just play around with the resizing when you're trying to like use your auto layout and try and like understand like what is actually going on with your content and its relationship to its siblings. So these would be its siblings going across, and then its relationship to its parent. So in this case, the container. It's always good to sort of like learn how this tool works, because it's very similar to how like CSS and HTML would work, for example, like a flex or a grid container. Understanding the sibling and sibling, parent, and child relationships in your display modes is really, really important in code, and it's also really important in Figma. So yeah, definitely go through those and play around with it and see what you can come up with. Then we have distribution and alignment. So I've got my my previous avatars here. and we can go through some of these as to what actually happens with distribution and alignment now. So this is actually a new feature that didn't exist before. So what we have here is we have like what we used to have, which was packed. And then we also have a new thing that's called space between. So what packed does is that, as you can sort of see, the actual container is set to hug contents and hug contents, meaning that it will like resize to the child. So in this case, sorry, the children. So in this case, the avatars. So we can sort of see that we have a 48 pixel spacing around everything, right? So that's where that 48 is coming from over on the right-hand side there. But then we also have that 24 pixels in between each element, right? And we've done the exact same thing over on here, but we've given the overall resizing a different property. One is packed, one is space between. So to do that, all you have to do is click on this little guy over here and click on packed or space between, depending on what you want to do. So what does packed do? So packed just simply like packs the children together, right? So as I stretch this out, you'll notice that like it doesn't stretch or anything like that. It simply has put this together, these items together based on the spacing there, right? And then we can use this alignment and padding to then choose where we want it to go. So we could pack it to the left-hand side. We could pack it to the middle. We could pack it to the right-hand side. If we were to actually stretch this out, we could also pack it to maybe the top left, the top right, bottom left, bottom right as well, if we wanted to. But in this case, I'm going to leave it as centered, and I'm also going to just reset this back to hug contents and hug contents. So it resets back to the original size. All right. And if we have a look at what space between does, is it's very similar, but as you probably guessed, it actually calculates the space between and distributes that evenly. So as you can sort of see, we still have that 48 all the way around. But if we go into our little window here, we can see that we've set it to space between. So as we stretch this out, you'll notice that the spacing is no longer set to 24, but it's set to auto because we've set it like that. And as you can also see, because of the direction that we've set, so we've set a horizontal direction, we can only do top, middle, or bottom. So if I stretch this out a little bit more, vertically, what we can then see is that we can align it to the top, middle, or bottom in that kind of way. So this is really helpful for things like Navbars and other things like that. But what it allows us to do is not have to calculate our spacing for each of those things. So if you think of like for iOS or some Android apps use a bottom bar, and having something that will responsively work from, let's say, a 320 wide device all the way up to like a 480 wide device. So like some of the Samsung Galaxies and stuff like that. You want your design to work nicely between all of those different sizes. You don't want it to be bespoke for each of those sizes, because that would be a nightmare. And trying to figure out the exact like spacing that it should be, again, would be a total nightmare. So this definitely helps with setting those kinds of things up. One thing to note throughout all of this is there are some limitations in how this kind of stuff works. So I've sort of listed some of these out, but you might find them in your, like, as you're playing around a little bit more. But there is no negative space between, unfortunately. That's still not a thing. So meaning that, for example, you may want to, if you go back to distribution and thing, we may want to have these overlap each other, right? That is kind of possible if you set this to, again, hug contents and hug contents. It is kind of possible if you use the space between and then you shrink it smaller than what it should be. So in this case, it should be set to, it should be set to space between for that one. And then we can sort of like fake it by doing that, but it's not really scientific because we can't really sort of like set an exact pixel amount. So it's going to be based off of like whatever you set like with your hand. So it's not really accurate, and it's not really great for your developer. Your developer's going to be like, why did you do that to me? So yeah, it's not exactly the greatest, but it can be done technically. Some of the limitations, no negative padding. So in this case, there's a few cases where I would love to use negative padding for things like putting it inside of another item, but like offsetting some stuff. So yeah, there's a few different like reasons. It's a very like weird like edge case, but like I do use it enough to miss it. There's no locked aspect ratios for like resizing things, which would be like awesome. But for example, like you can't set some to be 16:9 and have it resized to be 16:9. I wish that was a case, but it's still not possible. There are some like hacks and tweaks and stuff like that. Same with like minimum widths and minimum heights. There are some hacks to do that. I personally don't like to do those kinds of hacks because I like to use the tool as natively as possible. But it is technically possible, but it's just not the greatest. So let's dive into some examples of what you can do though. So what we have here is I've just done up a really basic navbar, what you might have seen like 1,000,001 times over and over again. But what we have now inside of this frame, we have our navbar, right? And then if I toggle that down, we can then see that we have a frame 5 over on the right-hand side, and then we have a logo on the left-hand side. So on this navbar, we actually have set the contents to be hug contents, but then we've also said to stretch it based on like however wide the item is. So if I come in and squeeze this down, you can sort of see how everything stays in place. But what I've also done is I've set it to space between. So that will automatically calculate how much space should be in there so that it pushes the logo all the way to the left and it pushes the menu all the way to the right. But as you can also see, I've set individual padding. So I've set it to 20 and 20, top and bottom. And then I've set it right-hand side 24, left-hand side 32, just to balance it out just that little bit more. Because the logo was a little bit small and a little bit meek in comparison to the big button over this side. So, and then as you can sort of see, I've also done a frame within a frame that also has auto layout. So this frame 5 is also an auto layout that has 16 spacing in between it. So as you can sort of see, I could stretch that out and set it to whatever I wanted there. I could set it to a stack like that. I'm not quite sure why you'd want to, but you can, and you can set that to 16 to get it back to normal. And then even inside of that that menu part, I do have auto layouts that are the buttons there. So each of those are an auto layout themselves. So you're not limited by how many auto layouts that you can have within each other. You can definitely have nested auto layouts within auto layouts within auto layouts. So don't feel as though that you can't. In this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 like children that are auto layouts that are then have a parent of one single auto layout that has another grandparent that is another auto layout. So we have it's all auto layouts all the way down. Then I've copied something very similar to the Airbnb, like a little checkout. Sorry, not checkout, like a little search there. And if you have a look at it, what we can actually do is I've actually set each of these to be auto layouts. So if we zoom in on this, I've set the location and where are you going to be auto layouts. And what I've done there is I've set it to fill container. So as I stretch it, it actually like goes to a certain like point, and then obviously it'll break if you go too far. But what I've done is I've let all of these stay a fixed width, but I've made this fill the container. So this will be the variable width within it. Then I've set individual padding. So in this case, I've set no padding on this, but in this case, I've actually set some padding on the left-hand side. There's 24 pixels on each of these to then allow for that. I then have this button, which is also an auto layout. So it has the icon with a background as the auto layout. And then overall, then all of this is also inside of an auto layout, which then has the 12, 12, and 12, and then 36. So what this allows for is if we were to set this to 36, for example, on this side, you can sort of see that it's a little bit lopsided and doesn't look great, right? Or vice versa, if we just did 12 all the way around, it wouldn't look great either, right? So having these individual paddings makes it so much easier to work with and keep everything nice and aligned and looking visually great. So that's how we can do it on not only smaller components, but slightly higher components like a navbar or a call to action search bar. But I also wanted to sort of like show you how you can take it to the next level and apply it to a whole page. So in this case, what I actually have is this blog list actually is an auto layout itself. So if I zoom out just a little bit, what you can actually see is that each of these items, if I toggle them down, so I have I have the actual blog list over on the left-hand side here. I have the blog list, which is an auto layout. As you can sort of see, it's a vertical layout with 0 spacing and 0 padding. But what that does is that allows me to have these 3 items within it, but I can also adjust the positioning of it without having to sit there and nudge pixels all the way around. So this allows me to like quickly move stuff around and make decisions later on. Inside of each of these things, they also have their own auto layouts. As you can sort of see, there's a header here that has some spacing above and below, like 64. And then it also has some spacing here that's set to, this one really should be set to, instead of fixed width, it should say fill container. So it goes to the filled container rather than setting an actual spacing like that. So that allows us to set this up. So when I have this one here as well, we also have even more auto layouts all the way down. So why would you do this? Well, in this case, I've actually set it up so that I can move this row up and down. I can move this item left and right within there. And then I can sort of like play around with like the positioning of things. I could also go as far as to move this item out of there completely and put it inside of here, for example. I'd obviously have to change the color contrast and all that kind of stuff. But using auto layout allows you to just drag and drop elements and keep all that spacing, keep all that alignment, keep all of that padding available and clear and concise to what you've set. So why is this important? Well, the really cool part about this is that if you actually spend the time to do this, you can actually make responsive design really, really easy. So if I like shrink this in a little bit and change this to 768, we can then just delete a few of these items and then really take advantage of all this auto layout stuff. So I can set this to fill container. And then I can also set this this one here to 768 as well. But then I'd have to set this these items to be space between. And then set this stuff here. So we've got this bottom here. I can ungroup that. And I've got the copyright here. And then I've got the left-hand side stuff here. So I would take this one and update that to the latest, and then set this to space between and set that to a horizontal layout. So then that way, when we move this over, we have this copyright that should be, what's going on here? We've got this. Oh, it's because we set some ridiculous padding there. So let me just change that there and set that to 24. There we are. So now we have this here. We have our auto layout working really nicely. And we didn't have to do all that much to set that up. And then if we wanted to make a mobile version, we can then duplicate that again. Maybe set that to 375 wide, and then delete these items here. So we just simply stack it. And then for this footer element, instead of doing a horizontal layout, we might do a vertical layout to stack that. So we can simply set that to stack there. And then again, we just got to set up all of these items here and then just do packed there. So this one here will also, because this is a stack here as well, we'll make sure that this is also set to packed, which it is. And there's, okay, well, let's get rid of that one. We don't need that one there. And we will set this one to vertical as well. All right, and then we'll say hug contents for that one, and we'll we'll set that one to fill container to fill the available space there, and then fill container there, and then we will say hug contents for the available space there. So as we go through this, it makes it so much easier to then like adjust all these different things as we're going through it. This shouldn't be set to clip content, but there we are. So let's undo that clip content. There we are. So what you can then sort of see there is that we now need to adjust a little bit of the spacing in between some of these elements, and we can set that to maybe like 32 above and below. The spacing in between. And then we can set this to, instead of like 96, we could set that to maybe like 48, 32, 48, 32. And then that spacing becomes a lot more clear. And of course, this stuff here, we can just set to maybe 375 minus maybe 24 on each side. So 48 total. And then everything just sort of like collapses in on each other, which is great. So 48, we can then set that to 24 and then 48 and 24. Yeah, so that's how you can quickly make something like this and set it to something that will be really, really quick and easy to change the overall spacing and auto layout with like no time at all. So desktop, tablet, and mobile, if I didn't have to explain all those different steps, it'd probably take me about maybe 2 minutes to go from desktop to tablet to mobile. While doing all of that. So auto layout really, really helps, not only at a really fundamental small level, like at a button level, not only at a medium level as like a slightly more complex component, like a navbar or a search button, but it can also help on the page level for responsive design. So yeah, that's it from me. We'll now open it up for questions, and I'll let Diego take it away.
For sure. Awesome. So I apologize if I might mispronounce anyone's name. So Ellie's question is, at what point in a design process should auto layout be applied? Should auto layout be used for each button early in design for fast adjustments, or better apply once a design iteration is close to complete in order to make easy/small adjustments? Yeah,
so for me, I try to do auto layout as soon as possible, right? So even for a button, like if I type in something and then I simply select it, press Shift A, apply fill, that's actually faster than creating a rectangle, putting it behind, like doing all those things. I actually find that using auto layout is actually faster than doing it manually. Right, because they have those shortcuts. So Shift A is the one to use and to remember, because if you have multiple items like this, for example, you can select all of those and hit Shift A, and then it'll apply it into a frame, and then you can apply like 24, 24, and then give it like a fill and do whatever you want there, right? That if I had to do that manually, I would have had to create the 3 rectangles again, right? I would have to select all 3 of these, then make sure that this is set to 24, then create a frame around it. And I would have to select all 3 of them again, select it, make sure that it's 24 away, 1, 2, 3, 24 away, like then click on this one, see that it's 39. So move that over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 24, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then I'll change it to the color there, right? So you see how much faster that using auto layout is. So it's not so much like a thing that you absolutely have to do, but I find that if you want to be fast and accurate, so really efficient, I think that auto layout is the best way to do this. The other really cool thing about this is that auto layout doesn't rely on your elements, like your objects. It doesn't rely on your objects on your design to actually be inside of a component, or in Sketch's case, a symbol. If you use Sketch has a very similar thing to auto layout, but you do have to have it inside of a symbol for it to take advantage of it. So for me, I find that, like, yes, you could wait until the end to do it, but like, why wait? That like it actually makes it faster and more accurate to do it that way.
Sweet. All right, from Rafael. Should we expect some upgrade in the near future that Figma will use this flexibility from auto layout and implement responsiveness by only setting breakpoints for the frames and or project?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have access to their design roadmap, but I wouldn't expect it anytime soon, because responsive design like that is actually quite hard to pull off, like the way that they're doing it, because they've started off as a vector tool. It's a lot harder to set things like breakpoints and stuff like that, because you have to have a notion of what is the parent frame, right? So if you sort of like think about like how like both Sketch and Adobe XD work, they have what they call an artboard. An artboard is kind of like a frame, but a little bit different, where there can only be one artboard within the design. So you can't have an artboard within an artboard, for example. The artboard is sort of like the be all and end all for that. You can have artboards side by side, don't get me wrong, but you can't have an artboard within an artboard. Whereas Figma, you do have to have a frame within a frame, or you can have a frame within a frame. And what you would need to do in that case is set the, you'd have to like understand like what is the overall like frame, like what is the parent frame. And I don't know if they're going to do that. And I don't know if they would actually set it up so that you can, like, because obviously right now you can go to your frame and you can set it to whatever. So let's say like a MacBook or whatever, and it will do that. But then you would have to then say, okay, that item, if we go into a certain like position, that stretching of that frame is going to then have these different consequences. So CSS breakpoints, and Figma is pretty diligent about this, is that they don't want to simply recreate what CSS is doing or HTML is doing, because we have both HTML and CSS, and we also have like native development like Android and iOS. So they don't want to just simply create it, even though as frustrating as it is, like, why don't you just create it like this? Like, come on. Like they simply don't want to do that. So I don't know if they're going to do breakpoints in the near future, but I haven't heard anything like remotely close to that. So for now, it is just doing it the manual way of like creating 3 separate frames and then applying those different sizes and different versions of your components, for example, or using auto layout to help with that conversion between desktop, tablet, and mobile. So sorry for the bad news, but I haven't anything.
Awesome. So we have Kaylee's question, which is in regards to Ellie's question, which was, at what point in design process should auto layout be applied? So Kaylee's question was, ditto Ellie's question on when. For example, with the avatar / space between example with the green box, the first avatar, or did you create all 4 avatars and the green box manually and then add the auto layout? Is there a benefit to adding the auto layout at a certain time in the creation?
Not really. I mean, so let's say that we started off with this avatar, right? We'll just put it over here. So what, like if we were to like recreate something like this nav bar up the top here, if we were to recreate that, like we would create a really sort of like dark gray rectangle, right? And then we can move that up and over to the right-hand side. Let's set it to like, I don't know, 24 by 24. Whoop, I always do that, 24, thank you. Maybe, I think it might be closer to 32. Let's go 32 and set that to like 2 pixels, right? And then bring it to the front. If I wanted to create, if I also wanted to add a button here, let's just say that this is the right size. I know it's a little bit bigger than the one over there, but let's set that to share. And then we also have like the name of the file there, and we can set that to white. And then we also have like some other items over here, right? So if I was to like recreate this as I'm going along, like it depends on like what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to be accurate with it, like I might just like quickly mock up something like this and then go, okay, well, let's break this down into smaller parts. So I might select these here and then do Shift A there to give that the spacing that it needs. So maybe like 16 or so there. Then I have this item, which doesn't really need an auto layout because there's only one item. But I do want to have the spacing between those two the same. So I'll set that to center, so it's centers with each other. And I'll also give that 16 to be the same as these guys over here. Then what I would do is I'd select this one, and this one, plus the background, and then do Shift A again. And then I would apply like whatever I need to. So in this case, space between, I would set it to, let's say, it's probably like 8 pixels above and below. And then let's say 20 pixels, or like, let's go 8, 8, and 8 all the way around, right? Something like that. And then we can then set it to the middle, right? So as you can sort of see, like I quickly wireframed like what it would be, like using some like basic shapes and like assets that I already had, right? So you definitely don't need to right out the gate, like as you're creating these rectangles, for example, you didn't need to create those into an auto layout straight away, like Shift A on that and then duplicate that. Oops, sorry, did not hit Shift A properly there. Shift A there, and duplicate that across. You don't necessarily have to, but you, as you sort of saw there, because it's already in a frame, and it has that 15 pixels, it already adjusted those like really easily. So there are some benefits to creating it as you go, i.e. that like you can like quickly make something like this with no time at all. But there isn't anything stopping you from like doing it after the fact, like you've got the basic layout, then you want to go back and reapply. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. I would always like name like your frames as well, just to give it a little bit of an easier time, or like whatever it is, and then like Navbar, just so that because it can get a little bit confusing when everything is like these two like either horizontal or vertically stacked rectangles, and they all start to look the same, right? So there's no real thing to say like, oh, you have to do it at this point or you have to do it at that point. It sort of like depends on like what your flow is. And my flow, as you sort of like saw there, is like I just created the basic elements, and then I went back and redid it. It's not that big of a deal either way. But the main thing is that you do use auto layout. Whether you start off with it or you end with it, up to you.
Sweet. So Yasuko is asking, seems like the container is good for responsive websites. I learned that we can use frame instead of group to design responsive pages. How using container is different from setting with frame? Would you recommend container?
So container, there isn't a thing called container. That was just the name of the layer. So fill container, that just means that fill to its parent. In this case, if I was to stretch this out, you can sort of see that this parent, this tools, is a parent. So I'll just put in brackets, this is a parent, right? And then these here are children. So child, 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 right? So when I then say I want to fill the container, right? So in this case, it's set to 30 by 30 because it's set to a fixed width and a fixed height. If I say I want to fill the container, that just means that it fills the available space in its parent. So there isn't actually a thing called container. It's just whatever the parent is to that is the container. So hopefully that clears that up. It is again like one of those things where like if you're thinking about like when should I use like groups versus frames, a group will automatically become a frame if you use auto layout, because all a frame is a fancy group. And to prove it, like you can look at even like the shortcut for like creating a frame, right? So if you like create a group, it's Command G, right? And then that will group it like that. If you want to frame these two, it's Command Option G. So it's just a fancy like addition to the basic Command G, right? It's not like Command F or something like that. So what you can sort of like see here is that because it's a frame, I now have access to things like an auto layout, a layout grid, and like fill and color and stroke and all that kind of stuff. Whereas if this was a group, if I adjust the color on this, it changes the children, right? It treats it as their siblings of each other. Whereas if I frame this, I should say, the frame becomes an object as well. So if I change the fill to something and change it to red, you can see that it actually adjusts to the background of that. So groups and frames are very similar, but frames just extend the basic understanding of what a group is. Container doesn't exist. It just means the parent frame around the children. So yeah, hopefully that clears that up. Hopefully that didn't muddy the water further.
So Ali is asking, can we have a copy of the file you are working on to play around with?
There's nothing really exciting there. I would actually suggest using like Figma's one. Because they use like similar examples, and they actually have even more examples. And like I would definitely go based off of that. So yeah, jump into Figma's community page, and there is a file called Figma's Auto Layout Playground, and that would be the best place to go through there.
Sweet. Kaylee is asking, can you please demo how to add an extra item to an existing auto layout? Something like another button on a navbar or a different type of ad in like a subheader on the flower page.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say, okay, so we have like a navbar here, or let's just do this here. So if I was to like I mean, I could draw a rectangle, right? Like if I press the right button, that is. I could draw a rectangle, like that. And then based on like where I drew it, it's actually drawing it in between frame 5, which is the menu, right? And then rectangle 7 and the logo. So what I've set the nav bar to be is space between. So what this does is that it says like, oh, you have 3 items. Okay, well, let's like figure out like what the space between the logo and the newly found rectangle that we have, and then the rectangle to the menu, and then let's like automatically space that between. If I wanted to, for example, like I could drag and drop that inside of this auto layout, because as I mentioned, this is also an auto layout that I can then like put that inside of there, right? So I could do it that way, or I can simply, if I already have a whole bunch of buttons, I can just hit Command D, so that will just duplicate. Or you could hit Command C, Command V, which is a little bit slower, but does the same thing. The reason why this works is because it again is putting it inside. When I hit Command C, Command V, or Command D, I am duplicating it inside of the parent, and the parent is menu. The menu then has these like spacing variables and the padding variables already applied to it. So it then just falls in line with the rest of them, right? It doesn't just like put it wherever it wants. It actually goes, oh, you're another child of mine. Okay, get in line, right? So it whips them into shape and says like, no, you need to fall in line with the rest of them. So that's the kind of thing that you can definitely do. And the same sort of thing here is that, like, for example, if I have this, if I have this one here, I could add another row. So I can select on this row, and then because it's inside of this content, and content is inside of the overall blog list, if I hit Command D, it's actually going to duplicate a whole nother row, and then it's also going to push everything down. If I simply wanted to just add another item in here, I would then select on the item, hit Command D, and then that would obviously push it outside of like what is currently available there. But it would allow me to do that as well. So hopefully that answered your question. But yeah, it's just simply, you can either create something brand new and then try to move it into the auto layout, or you can grab something existing and then hit Command C, Command V, or Command D to duplicate, and it'll fall in line because it's already inside of that item, that parent.
Sweet. Peter is asking, can you create auto layout components to use in your assets panel across all your Figma files?
I might need to get Peter to clarify what he means there. So do you want to like, or we'll let Peter, yeah, like figure that out and say what he says and move on to the next question.
Peter Noah, this is you. This is for you, Peter Noah. So please elaborate on your question. So Roy's question, so as a general rule, do you recommend using frames over groups?
Yes, there are, like, I would say that I use groups very, very sparingly. I only really use groups for things like, for like a logo, for example. So if I was to like create a logo, like really, really basic logo, so I just do logo, and then let's say that we had a mark there that is like 32 pixels, whatever. If I was to do this, I could technically do an auto layout and then do that, but that doesn't allow for like resizing and all that kind of stuff. Whereas a group does, right? So if I undo this and say that this is a circle or whatever, and let's set this to, yeah, let's go 20 or something like that, right? If I outline this and say outline stroke or flatten, either one will work. If I have this and this, and I want the basic like spacing to be there, what you'll remember is that a logo isn't really based on exact like pixels in between there. It's usually based on ratios. So you might sort of like go, okay, well, the spacing between here and here is like 1.5 of the zeros wide, right? Of the O's wide or something like that. right? It's usually not based on an exact pixel amount. It's based on like a ratio that can be drawn from the logo itself. And then that way, like there's never like, oh, like why isn't that 4 pixels away? It's like, well, it isn't the right size for that. So when I click on these two, if I group those, I can now like resize those, and those would stay the same ratio away always, right? So whereas if I put this, if I did the same exact thing but then changed it to a frame, you could technically set it so that like, because if I do this, it'll just like cut out. You can technically make this go, instead of like top and left, you can set it to scale, and you can set this one to scale. So scale, and this one also to scale, right? So you can technically do that as a frame and then like do that. But I find that that's just a little bit slower than setting that to a group and then going from there. So technically you can do exactly the same thing in a frame as you can do in a group. But yeah, it sort of like is up to you as to how you want to set that up. Personally, what I would do is I would group it, and then I'd put it inside of like a component, and then have different components that I can then switch between. So I might have this one. Oh, I lost the video frame there. That's all right. What's going on there? I lost the video for my camera. That's all right. I'll do it without the video camera. But yeah, if I was to do it like that, then I would like change this to logo, for example, and then create this as a variant, and then do a stacked version of that, and then put that underneath, right? And then maybe I make this a little bit smaller. So maybe make it to like 8 pixels or something like that, and put it underneath. And yeah, do something like that. So, and in this case, I would have to make sure that that frame gets reset to be there. And then I would set that property, instead of default, I'd set that to horizontal. I can spell, and set this one to vertical. So we have a horizontal stack and a vertical stack. And so even though this one, like this original one, was a group, as soon as you use it as a component, it then removes the group, and then applies the scale to it, right? And then same sort of thing here, it applied the scale to both of those, and then like created it into a component and removed the arbitrary grouping there. So yeah, Figma like tries to outsmart you a whole lot, and definitely can if you're not aware of what you're doing.
Sweet. So Peter Noah got back to us. Thank you, Peter. So I'll ask the original question again. He asked, can you create auto layout components to use in your assets panel across all your Figma files? So he said, so say you have a bunch of auto layout buttons, and you want to be able to use those buttons for all your Figma projects. Can those be in all your assets? Sorry, can those be in your assets library somehow so you can access them everywhere?
Yes. So that's using libraries, and depending on your subscription to Figma, you'll either have access to libraries or not. But it's not to say that you can't like quickly. So for example, like if I was to like use these buttons, so if I go back to all padding, it's not to say that you can't use like just simply copy this, for example, and then copy and paste that into any other file. Like that would be a cheat way if you don't want to pay for Figma. But yeah, libraries would be what you're asking for there, Peter. Thanks for the clarification. But yeah, that's what you'd be after is like how to use libraries effectively. And that would be something that the library, the only problem with that is like if you're using it across different projects, then you wouldn't be using it for if you were using it across different projects, you would, if you change it in one of them, it changes in all of them, right? Which actually might be worse. So that would be the difference there, is that if you're wanting to use it as a base, then duplicate it and then like tweak it to fit the to match the sort of like feeling and the sort of like design and the colors and the typography and the roundness of the buttons and all that kind of stuff to the client, then yes, like I'd probably just create your own like UI kit and then copy and paste the elements that you need into that and then make the changes. If you are actually doing something that requires the exact same components that need to then be synced across everything, then I'd be using libraries. So like it might actually be better for you to create something like this sort of like button structure like I have here, and then like do that yourself and copy and paste it for everything. Because that's exactly what I would do, is I'd copy this, go to a new page, paste this in, and then just simply select everything that I want to select, and then change like the colors to whatever. So I might like select all of those colors, change that fill to, I don't know, green or whatever, and do that for all of my designs, right? So maybe the brand color is green and I can do all of that. So yeah, doing that again, you can then just select all of those again and then find all the other things that aren't that exact green, and then change it to something else. So again, change it to green, but you might change it to a lighter green. And then you can go through that and then do that over and over again. So yeah, setting that kind of stuff up actually isn't all that hard. And then you can also do the same sort of thing with your typography and set all of that kind of stuff up as well. So you can select all of these and then change it. Instead of like inter and semi-bold 16, you could change it to, for example, like Comic Sans or something like that, right? Like Comic New, and set it to like 20 by like 28, something like that, right? And then you can start to use those wherever you need, and make the changes as you need. Apply drop shadows, apply gradients to the buttons, apply strokes to the buttons, whatever you need.
Sweet. Farin is asking, is the, and in quotes, hug container function the same as what we had before as auto layout on Figma?
Yeah, so the hug contents is sort of like the default for it. So what that just means is that fit it to whatever the size of the object is, like the child. So if you think of the auto layout frame as the parent, so in this case, we have this one here. If we duplicate this out, this one here, if we zoom in a little bit more, we have our nice Comic Sans, Comic New font there. You can sort of see that it is set to hug contents and hug contents. So it is basing it off of the 12, 12, 16, 16 for that, right? So if we like were to click into that, we can sort of see that it's 12, 12, 16, 16, right? As soon as we stretch that out, you'll notice that the resizing over on the right-hand side is now set to fixed width. And what that means is that the user has overridden like what the actual width should be, in this case, fixed width, to 204 pixels. So when we go to look at this, we can then see now it's 68 and 68. It still has the padding of the 16 and 16. So at any time we go, oh, you know what? I shouldn't have stretched that. We can then switch it back to hug contents, and it'll inherit that 16 and 16 there. So that's the difference. And of course, like if you had a frame or if you had another auto layout above it, you can then say like fill the container for that. So you would have to set that to, if we go to hug contents, so you can sort of see that it's set to fix there. If we had this frame here that is also an auto layout, so I switch it to auto layout, we can then like stretch that out and then set it to whatever we want to fill the container there, right? So in this case, nothing has changed, but that's because this container thinks, this frame one thinks it needs to have all this extra padding. So as I stretch out this frame now, it'll also stretch out the button. because the frame is set to a fixed width, but the button here is set to fill container. So it will fill based off of whatever we set the padding to. So we could set it to, I don't know, like 20, 24, 20, 24. Use that moving forward. So now if we look at it, it'll be 24 and 24. So it'll like override what you have set. And this is, this is a great way to both have what you call in HTML and CSS an inline button versus a block button, and it allows you to have the best of both worlds.
Sweet. So, Ellie's question. Let's say you create a frame with auto layout. You then duplicate a button within this frame and you drag it to use somewhere else in your design. Will it still be considered a child and held within the constraints of this frame / auto layout? If yes, is there a workaround here?
So can you repeat those steps again? So we have a frame.
Of course. So you create a frame with a layout. You then duplicate a button within this frame and you drag it to use somewhere else in your design. Will it still be considered a child and held within the constraints of this frame / auto layout? And if yes, is there a workaround that?
Yeah. So if you so let's say that we have these two buttons, right? If I drag this outside of the frame, it as you can sort of see, the frame collapsed and returned there. So I don't know if they're referring to dragging the button or if they're referring to dragging the frame. But if I move the frame around, like if you then put that frame inside of another frame and that had an auto layout, then it would be at the beck and call of that frame, right? So the parent like usually sets the tone for the child of it. So
they're referring to the button. Sorry, by the way. I'm assuming, Ellie, you're referring to the button, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So in that case, as soon as you take it out, it everything collapses back to normal. And as you can sort of see, it's no longer at the beck and call of this frame one. It's no longer a child of that. So for example, this button is no longer inside of frame one, and therefore it doesn't listen to what it has to say there. It is still, because this one was fill container, right? This obviously has no container to fill to. So Figma has done a smart thing here and said, oh, because you've, let's duplicate it again. So as you can sort of see, this is fill container. As soon as you drag and drop this out, it changes it to a fixed width, right? To it's because it's sort of like, oh, you might want it to still be that same width, right? You might be like experimenting, you might be doing whatever. So I can then quickly change that to hug contents. In this case, there is no parent to fill to, so there is no fill container like option available. So like that's what's sort of like happening there. But because there is nothing to fill to, it will then set the width to a fixed width and is no longer beholden to the original frame.
Kaylee is asking to add another line of text in the flower page between the date and a floral weekend. To make this change to the 12 showing, would it be best if the flower image with the text was a parent component and those 12 are already children and will automatically adjust? That was a very long question. I can totally repeat it if you need to.
Yeah, let's do that again.
Cool. So Kaylee's asking to add another line of text in the flower page between the date and this is in parentheses, a floral weekend. To make this change to the 12 showing, would it be best if the flower image with text was a parent component and those 12 are already children and will automatically adjust?
Right. Yeah. So if I was to create another, like let's say that a piece of text here, so hello, blah blah blah. You can't see it right now because it is black. So let's just change that to white, and let's just change it to 100 pixels, just so we can actually see what's going on. So yes, I can create another piece of text like in between something. Just like if I was to create something else over here, and then let's change it to red, for example, and then drag and drop that in, and I could place that anywhere in the content, right? So what it does is it looks for like the breaks in the layout, and it tries to understand like where like you might want to put it inside of there. Of course, if you do actually want to adjust it even further, like let's say that you wanted it in between this one and this one, what you can then do is hit Command X to cut it out, and then select one of the items here and then paste it inside of there, right? And then as you can sort of see, it's then like putting it inside of that item there. But what we can do as well is we can adjust it not only visually in the canvas, but we can also adjust it as part of like the row here, and then move that up and down. So you can use the up and down, left and right arrow keys in this case, and move that across if you want to. So if you can't, for whatever reason, like target specifically a like in between like two items, then try to actually do it like using the layers, because sometimes it's easier to visualize where that should be. Because yeah, like if I was to try and put that right away in between there, as you can sort of see, like I don't actually get the option to do that. So yeah, that definitely is a thing. The other part to that question was, will everything automatically adjust? Well, that obviously depends on how you've set up the auto layouts. In my case, I have actually set it up so that the overall like thing is also an auto layout. So no matter like how many things that I create, it will always like automatically adjust no matter where I create them. So as you can sort of see, I'm just creating like random crap everywhere really, and it is also just adjusting as we go through.
Sweet. And our last question from Armando: how do you prototype a press button following a navigation?
How do we prototype a, say that again? So how do we prototype a pressed button?
Yes, how do we prototype a press button following a navigation? Armando, Daza, if you are still around, if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, because there are things that we can go through there, but that's more like prototyping and state management for prototyping. So yeah, it's not really to do with auto layout, unless I'm misinterpreting that question.
Armando, if you're there.
That's all right if he's not.
Okay, cool. That was our last question. Oh, wait, one second. I'm here on the chat. Okay. Okay, here on the chat. Maybe he's going to explain a little more. While Armando is explaining, I just wanted to say that Shilpi says, Kieran, you're an amazing explainer. Very, very helpful. Very clear and appropriately answering. I'm glad I joined this. You're welcome, Peter, as well. We are just waiting for Armando's question, and that seems to be our last question of the day. And I do apologize for all the dogs barking in the background, everyone. You're prototyping a button to be pressed. This is what Armando's saying. I don't know. And then jump to the next frame.
Yeah, that's more about like interactions and prototyping, and we'll get more into that later on, because there are some like updates coming to Figma later on. Either like I don't think they'll do it later this year because we're almost at the end of the year, but potentially early next year, where they're trying to do a little bit more around like interactions and that kind of thing. Because that is a really big like change for for our like livelihood is that like how those interactions are actually used. So there are some like animations and interactions and stuff like that that are coming to variants and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's some like really cool stuff coming down the pipe very, very soon. I'd say in the next couple of months, we should see that definitely in the first half of next year. I think they said that last time. But yeah, if that's it, then I guess
Sweet.
that's it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, as usual, Kieran. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. If you missed it or you had to leave or you jumped in late, remember this will be on the YouTube page and we have added it in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. Kieran, thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody for coming and all the kind words about my explanation skills.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Awesome. See you later.